What if I told you that most of us have been looking at conflict all wrong? I mean, it's an inevitable part of life, from the boardroom to the dinner table, but what if we could learn to see it not as a problem to be avoided, but as a real opportunity to truly understand one another?
It's no wonder our gut reaction is to just avoid it. The word itself brings up all these feelings of tension and arguments. But what if that instinct is actually holding us back? What if, by learning to really understand conflict, we could unlock new opportunities for growth and connection?
Okay, so let's bust a few myths, shall we? First, this whole idea that conflict is always a bad thing, that's just not true. Honestly, some of the most creative and innovative ideas come from a healthy disagreement. Second, we've got to ditch this zero-sum game mentality. A win-win outcome is almost always possible. And finally, that urge to find a quick fix, it's our worst enemy. True resolution isn't about speed, it's about depth.
And that right there brings us to the single most important idea in this entire explainer. Seriously, if you remember one thing, let it be this. You can't fix a problem until you truly understand it. You have to diagnose before you can ever prescribe a solution.
Just think about it. How many times have you tried to fix a problem only to have it pop right back up again a week later? That's because you were treating the symptoms, not the disease. When we rush, we just get these superficial outcomes. To achieve lasting, real win-win results, the understanding and analyzing stages have to come first, always.
So how do we even begin to diagnose a conflict? Well, the first step is to figure out its source, and that's where our next framework comes in. We're going to break down conflict into 4 distinct categories, which will give you a powerful new way to understand and navigate pretty much any disagreement.
All right, let's dive into the 4 sources of conflict. We've got data-driven, value-driven, interest-driven, and need-driven conflicts. And trust me, once you get a handle on these 4 categories, you will never look at a disagreement the same way again.
So our first source is data-driven conflict. This is what happens when people are working with different information. Think about a time you and a friend argued about which way to go. You were both looking at different maps, and you were both convinced you were right. That's a classic data-driven conflict. The good news? These are usually the easiest ones to sort out. Next up, we have value-driven conflicts. And these are all about our core beliefs, our ethics, our culture, our worldview. And because these values are so deeply ingrained in who we are, they're not something you can just argue away or change in a single conversation.
Trying to prove whose values are right is almost always a dead end. It just doesn't work. So what do you do when you find yourself in a value-driven conflict? Simple. You change the conversation. You can acknowledge the different values, but then you pivot the discussion to more concrete ground, like the data or the interests and needs that are actually at play.
Third, we have interest-driven conflicts. These pop up whenever there's competition over some kind of limited resource. Think about 2 siblings fighting over the last slice of cake. That's an interest-driven conflict in its purest form. But it's not just about cake, right? It can also be about promotions at work, recognition, or even just the feeling of being right. And that brings us to our final and, honestly, our deepest category, need-driven conflicts. These are all about our most fundamental human needs. The need for security, the need to belong, the need to feel respected. Because these needs are so deep-seated, they can be the most challenging conflicts to resolve, especially since they so often get tangled up with our interests.
So we've talked about the 4 sources, but what do you do when you're faced with a conflict that seems to involve both interests and needs? How do you get to the heart of the matter? Well, that's where our next tool comes in. It's called the onion analysis, and it's one of the most powerful ways to peel back the layers of a conflict and find out what's really going on.
The outer layer of this onion represents our positions. These are the loud, rigid demands we make. Think about a time you heard a kid scream, "I want that toy." That's a position. It's a clear, simple demand, but it doesn't tell you a thing about why they want the toy.
But if you peel back that outer layer of positions, you'll find something much more interesting. The interests. These are the whys behind the whats. They are the underlying reasons and motivations that are driving that surface-level demand. And finally, when we get to the very core of the onion, we find the most important layer of all, the needs. These are the non-negotiables, the things we absolutely must have to feel safe, secure, and respected. And until these core needs are addressed, no conflict can ever be truly resolved. So how do you actually put this into practice? It's actually pretty straightforward. First, you just start by brainstorming all the possible interests and needs that might be at play.
Then you take it a step further and ask each person to really try and see things from the other person's perspective. And finally, you use this onion framework to separate the positions from the real issues. And that's when the real conversation can finally begin.
So we've covered a lot of ground today. We've talked about the 4 sources of conflict and the onion analysis. But this isn't just about learning some tools to resolve arguments. It's really about changing the way you see the world.
I mean, imagine being able to look at any argument, any disagreement, and instantly see what's really going on beneath the surface. That's the power of this framework. It gives you a new lens to see past all the noise and identify the fundamental causes of the tension.
And this doesn't just apply to our personal conflicts. We can use this exact same framework to understand the big societal conflicts we see in the news every single day. And what you'll often find is that many conflicts that are framed as these intractable clashes of values are actually driven by more concrete interests and unmet needs.
So I'll leave you with this. The next time you see a disagreement playing out, whether it's at work or at home, just ask yourself, what are the conflicts around me really about? What are they really about?
Thanks for joining us for this explainer. Until next time, remember to look for the onion in every conflict.